These 10 British science fiction films from the 1980s redefined what the genre could be while American audiences were distracted by Hollywood spectacle. While Star Wars, E.T. and 2001: A Space Odyssey dominated American screens, Britain was quietly producing some of the most psychologically devastating, philosophically rich and atmospherically haunting science fiction ever put on film, works that challenged viewers rather than simply entertained them. The British approach to science fiction in the late 1980s and early 1990s differed completely from their American counterparts. Where Hollywood pursued blockbuster thrills and optimistic futures like Blade Runner's noir aesthetic, British filmmakers embraced bleakness, sharp satire, and existential dread. Working with smaller budgets but unlimited imagination, they created films that feel more urgent today than ever before.
Threads.
Released in 1984, this BBC production depicts nuclear war and its aftermath with such unflinching realism that it traumatized an entire generation. Directed by Mick Jackson and written by Barry Hines, Threads follows two families in Sheffield as global tensions escalate into full nuclear exchange between NATO and the Warsaw Pact. This film builds directly on the BBC's nuclear film tradition established by Peter Watkins's The War Game in 1965, creating a lineage of British docudrama that no other nation has matched. Made for just £400,000, Threads achieved something no Hollywood blockbuster could: genuine terror. The film doesn't just show the immediate devastation of nuclear war, it follows the long-term consequences over decades. We watch civilization collapse, language deteriorate, and humanity itself regress into something barely recognizable. When it aired on BBC Two, it drew 6.9 million viewers and earned 4 BAFTA awards. American audiences saw it once on cable network TBS in 1985, introduced by Ted Turner himself, but it never received the theatrical release it deserved. The psychological impact of Threads was so severe that the BBC didn't show it again until 2003. One woman in the film is literally credited as "woman who urinates herself," and that reaction feels entirely justified. Critics have called it the film which comes closest to representing the full horror of nuclear war, and Peter Bradshaw described watching it as breaking out in a cold, shivering sweat and keeping me in that condition for 20 minutes, followed by weeks of depression and anxiety. The film shares thematic DNA with Raymond Briggs's animated When the Wind Blows from 1986, another British nuclear meditation that American audiences largely missed. Brazil. While Threads depicted humanity's worst-case scenario, Terry Gilliam's Brazil imagined something arguably worse: a future where bureaucracy itself becomes the instrument of oppression. This 1985 dystopian masterpiece stars Jonathan Pryce as Sam Lowry, a low-ranking government worker who dreams of escape from his mind-numbing existence in a world of malfunctioning machines and casual torture. The film's Orwellian nightmare draws directly from 1984 while adding Gilliam's surreal visual imagination. Brazil's journey to American screens became legendary in Hollywood. Universal Pictures wanted to cut 48 minutes from Gilliam's vision and change the ending. When Gilliam refused, the studio shelved the film indefinitely. In response, Gilliam took out a full-page ad in Variety, asking "Dear Sid Sheenberg, when are you going to release my movie Brazil?" This public confrontation turned a private dispute into a Hollywood spectacle. On the same night, Universal premiered their Oscar contender, Out of Africa. Brazil won Best Picture, Best Screenplay, and Best Director from the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. Universal finally released a modified version, but the damage was done. American audiences barely saw this masterpiece in theaters. Brazil's influence extends far beyond its initial release. With a 98% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, critics called it an audacious dark comedy, filled with strange imaginative visuals, and the British Film Institute ranked it as the 54th greatest British film of all time. The film's vision of a society drowning in paperwork while actual problems go unsolved feels prophetic in our current age of digital bureaucracy. Flash Gordon. For sheer campy spectacle, nothing matched Flash Gordon in 1980. Directed by Mike Hodges and starring Sam J. Jones, this adaptation of the classic comic strip was everything Hollywood sci-fi wasn't: colorful, theatrical, and gloriously silly. With Max von Sydow as the deliciously evil Ming the Merciless and a soundtrack by Queen, Flash Gordon embraced its comic book origins completely. The film's production was as dramatic as its plot. George Lucas had originally been offered the rights but declined, leading him to create something called Star Wars instead. Director Nicholas Roeg was initially hired before being replaced by Hodges. Even more bizarrely, Sam J. Jones had such severe disagreements with producer Dino De Laurentiis that he left during post-production, requiring most of his dialogue to be dubbed by another actor. Despite these problems, Flash Gordon became a massive hit in Britain, reaching the top 3 box office spots for 1980, despite being released in the final weeks of December. American audiences were less enthusiastic, and plans for sequels died after a disappointing opening weekend. Today, filmmakers like Edgar Wright consider it an all-time favorite, and its cult status continues to grow. Outland. From the same year came a very different kind of space adventure, Outland, starring Sean Connery as a federal marshal on a remote mining colony. Often described as high noon in space, this film transplanted the Western genre to the outer reaches of the solar system. Connery plays Marshal William O'Neill, who discovers that workers at the titanium mining facility are dying from contaminated drugs that increase productivity but cause psychotic breaks. Filmed at Pinewood Studios with a budget of $12 to $14 million, Outland earned respectable returns in America, but failed to capture the cultural imagination the way other sci-fi films did. Perhaps it was too grounded, too focused on labor disputes and corporate corruption. When audiences wanted laser battles and alien encounters, the film earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Sound and won Frances Sternhagen a Saturn Award for Best Supporting Actress, but it remains overshadowed by flashier contemporaries. Life Force. If Outland was too realistic, Life Force was perhaps too ambitious. To be Hooper's 1985 space vampire epic, based on Colin Wilson's novel The Space Vampires, follows the crew of a European space shuttle, who discover 3 humanoid beings in suspended animation aboard an alien craft. When brought back to Earth, these beings reveal themselves as energy vampires who feed on human life force, threatening to drain the entire planet. The film draws heavily from British sci-fi traditions established by Nigel Kneale's Quatermass and The Pit, mixing cosmic horror with invasion paranoia in ways that Hammer Film Productions had pioneered decades earlier. Cannon Films spent nearly $25 million on Life Force, hoping to create a blockbuster. They changed the title from The Space Vampires, worried it sounded too much like their typical exploitation fare. This decision backfired completely. Audiences expected something serious rather than the satirical horror comedy Hooper intended. The film earned only $11 million at the American box office, losing head-to-head against Ron Howard's Cocoon. Despite its commercial failure, Life Force has gained significant critical reassessment. Science fiction authority C.J. Henderson called it an incredible film and potentially the most intelligent vampire movie ever made. The film's ideas about energy, consciousness, and parasitic relationships feel remarkably prescient in our current age of social media addiction and digital vampirism. Morons from Outer Space. For pure absurdist comedy, nothing matched Morons from Outer Space in 1985. Written by and starring British comedy duo Mel Smith and Griff Rhys-Jones, this film imagined what would happen if aliens visiting Earth turned out to be just as stupid as humans. The plot follows 3 incompetent extraterrestrials who crash land in Britain after accidentally jettisoning their smarter companion into space. The film earned £1.5 million in Britain and became the 19th most popular movie of the year domestically. Its satirical take on both alien invasion films and British social customs was appreciated by UK audiences but barely received theatrical release in America. The film's existence was significant enough that Mel Brooks changed his planned title from Planet Moron to Spaceballs to avoid confusion. BFI critic John Spira defended the film as genuinely funny and praised its combination of base physical humor with sophisticated social commentary. The film mocked everything from British class systems to aggressive American foreign policy, making it a specifically British response to the alien invasion genre. Hardware. Moving into the early 1990s, Hardware represented Britain's attempt at cyberpunk horror. Richard Stanley's 1990 directorial debut, made for just $1.5 million, tells the story of a killer robot in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Set in the same universe as Judge Dredd and published in 2000 AD comics, Hardware combined practical effects with a pounding industrial soundtrack featuring Iggy Pop and Lemmy. This connection to British comic culture through 2000 AD gives Hardware a distinctly British sci-fi pedigree that American cyberpunk lacked. Despite its tiny budget, Hardware created a genuinely unsettling atmosphere of technological paranoia. The film's vision of humanity's relationship with artificial intelligence feels more relevant than ever as we grapple with questions about AI consciousness and control. Stanley's background in music videos gave Hardware a distinctly visual style that influenced countless later films despite its limited theatrical release. Slipstream. From 1989 came Slipstream, a post-apocalyptic adventure set in a world where massive wind systems have replaced traditional weather patterns. The film follows bounty hunters and criminals navigating this strange new landscape where the old rules no longer apply. While less well-known than other entries on this list, Slipstream's environmental themes and focus on adaptation in the face of climate change feel remarkably prescient. 2010, the year we make contact. Two films on this list deserve mention for their international co-production status and British directorial influence. 2010, the year we make contact. The 1984 sequel to Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey was directed by Peter Hyams and based on Arthur C. Clarke's sequel novel. While primarily an American production, its British literary roots and philosophical approach aligned more with British sci-fi sensibilities than Hollywood blockbusters. Roy Scheider leads a joint American-Soviet mission to Jupiter to discover what happened to the Discovery spacecraft. The film is solidly science-based and packed with ideas about communication, cooperation, and humanity's place in the cosmos. Critics acknowledged it as largely worthy of its predecessor and a damn fine sci-fi movie in its own right, but American audiences seemed uninterested in returning to the cerebral world of 2001. Altered States. Finally, Ken Russell's Altered States deserves recognition as a British director's contribution to mind-bending science fiction. This 1980 film stars William Hurt as a professor researching consciousness who finds himself physically transforming through his experiments. Russell's typically provocative style created something gloriously, deliriously weird that pushed the boundaries of what science fiction could explore about human nature and evolution. These films collectively earned multiple Academy Award nominations, 11 Saturn Awards, 6 Hugo Awards, 5 BAFTA Awards, 4 BSFA Awards, and 1 Golden Globe Award. Yet most American audiences missed them entirely, whether due to limited distribution, cultural differences, or simple bad timing competing against Hollywood blockbusters. Why did American audiences overlook these gems? The reasons are revealing and complex. British science fiction in the 1980s was darker, more satirical, and less action-focused than American expectations. These films prioritized psychological horror over special effects spectacle, philosophical questions over simple good versus evil narratives, and social commentary over escapist entertainment. Distribution also played a crucial role. Many of these films received only limited theatrical releases in America, if any. Some, like Threads, were made for television and never got proper theatrical distribution. Others found their audiences through VHS rentals rather than cinema screens, building cult followings slowly over decades. The cultural divide between British and American science fiction in the 1980s reveals fundamental differences in how each country approached the genre. Where American sci-fi often celebrated technology and human ingenuity, British films questioned these assumptions. Where Hollywood offered hope for the future, British filmmakers warned of potential disasters. Where American blockbusters provided clear heroes and villains, British films explored moral ambiguity and systemic failures. Today, as we face many of the same issues these films explored, their warnings feel more urgent than ever. Nuclear threats, environmental collapse, technological control, political oppression. Threats, nuclear nightmares remain relevant as long as atomic weapons exist. Brazil's bureaucratic dystopia mirrors our current struggles with surveillance and digital control. Hardware's killer machines echo contemporary fears about artificial intelligence and automation. These 10 films represent a lost golden age of British science fiction, when low budgets forced filmmakers to rely on imagination, intelligence, and atmosphere rather than expensive effects. They created works that disturbed, challenged, and inspired in equal measure, films that trusted their audiences to think rather than simply consume. The tragedy isn't just that American audiences missed these films in the 1980s, but that the independent, provocative spirit they represented has largely disappeared from modern science fiction. In an age of franchise filmmaking and corporate-approved content, these 10 films remind us what science fiction can achieve when filmmakers are free to explore humanity's darkest fears and strangest possibilities without compromise.